Hello.
Our story begins outside of Grandmaster Yoda's room. Anakin was walking away in disappointment. He was given sound advice the day before, but it wasn't what he wanted to hear. The Grandmaster had lost thousands of friends, mentors, and students over the course of his life. He had come to the conclusion that it wasn't one's burden when someone transcended into the living force. Rather, it should be recognized as a gift to have lived a life at all, and to have lived one until one's end. Sure, even Yoda could conclude that this death that Anakin feared the most was likely unnatural, but one should rejoice in those who transcend into the living force. Skywalker wanted to hear secrets of how to save someone from death, something that Jedi did not do. If it was the will of the Force, then it should be allowed to happen. After hearing the tragedy of the Sith Lord Plagueis and speaking with Yoda, the possibility of saving one from death felt more alluring. Anakin was upset that Yoda couldn't give him an out. To seek knowledge from the Sith was against his personal desires, but if he was pushed to the brink or the edge, then he would do it if it was all he could do. Skywalker had forgotten that Yoda went to Kashyyyk the previous night, and he was going to try and speak with him once more, but he wasn't there. Anakin's face was visibly distraught as he pondered if he really wanted to get advice about the Sith, or from the Sith. Palpatine knew something that the Jedi didn't know, and as he was strolling through the hallways thinking about it, he was intercepted. Obi Wan was walking in his direction, and he called out Anakin's name. Skywalker snapped out of his blind pacing, and he asked Obi Wan what was going on. Kenobi just asked Anakin how he was handling everything, specifically his new mission. There was a momentary pause in Anakin's voice, like he wanted to say something but there were people around so he wouldn't. Obi-Wan tilted his head, suggesting that they speak about this in the solitude of Anakin's room. When they eventually got there, Obi-Wan asked his student if he could try and persuade the council to pull him from the mission. Anakin shrugged his shoulders and slumped down onto his bed. He spoke for the first time since running into his master. He told Obi-Wan that he was having nightmares, and Yoda didn't give him good advice. Obi-Wan was almost in utter disbelief. He had his gripes with Yoda in the past, especially when he was closer to Anakin's age because of the whole training situation, but Yoda always did try his best to understand every Jedi he interacted with. Obi-Wan asked Anakin to elaborate, and he did, telling his side of the story and what Yoda said to him. Kenobi understood immediately what was missing, and he explained to Anakin where Yoda was coming from. Anakin listened, and he saw that Yoda wasn't trying to deny him a chance at saving someone's life. He was guiding Anakin to accepting that not everything can be controlled, that death, no matter how young or old, was inevitable, and despite what we want, it eventually comes. There is no permanence. Anakin was obviously a bit emotional at Obi-Wan saying this, and Kenobi sat down across from his student and asked what was really going on. Anakin asked his master if he could keep a secret. Obi-Wan smiled and told him that he was able to hide his death. Of course he could keep a secret. Perhaps that attempt at a joke would have landed better in any other conversation but here. Anakin told his master that he and Padme, well, he trailed off and Obi-Wan just said it, they were together. Anakin didn't understand how his master knew this was true. Honestly, how couldn't he tell? They were terrible at the whole secrecy aspect of the relationship. Obi-Wan just said he always knew and he never minded because it made him happy, and at the end of the day, that's all he cared about. Skywalker found this to be really endearing. They had thousands of conversations over the war, and no matter what, Obi-Wan played dumb even though he knew. Wow. It took Anakin a moment to really ingest this information. He regathered his composure and then told Obi-Wan that, well, they were having a child, and he was having nightmares about Padme dying in childbirth. Now Kenobi had to digest this information. He didn't mind that there was a child. He figured the two of them would eventually have one, just not so soon. He leaned back in the chair and rubbed his beard. He asked if anyone else knew. Anakin shook his head. Obi-Wan reminded his student that everything in the Force is in motion. Was he sure that the nightmares could become reality? Anakin reminded Obi-Wan about the dreams he had with his mother before her death. Obi-Wan thought for a moment, and asked Anakin what he wanted the Jedi to do about it. Kenobi put two and two together, and figured that Anakin was upset at Yoda because he wasn't given instructions on how to heal his wife and save her from death. Obi-Wan decided to tread carefully here, knowing how on edge Anakin could become with this topic. He told Anakin that even though he had dreams about it, it didn't mean it would come true. His student told him that it didn't matter. How could he accept that she was just going to die like that? It wouldn't be fair. Obi-Wan reminded his student how unfair life had been during the Clone Wars, but if they tried to redirect the course of everything, they could have lost more men, they could have hurt more civilians, they could have lost themselves in the pursuit of what they were as Jedi. He understood it hurt. Obi-Wan could assure him he understood. Qui-Gon and Satine died in his arms. Neither of them deserved to die when the time called them, but it was how it went, Unfair, sure, but their time was selected in those moments. Anakin wasn't content with just letting fate do that. He expressed that he wanted to stop people from dying. It was the same promise he made to Padme before the war began. He told her that he would someday learn to save people from death, but preventing death wasn't the Jedi way. To save those from dying was something that couldn't be done without the will of the Force. Obi-Wan tried to reassure Anakin that Padme likely wouldn't die. As it was, she was 25 and healthy. Anakin didn't trust his logic, but he was tired of Jedi being controlled by the will of the Force. Why don't they take destiny into their own hands and control it for once? Obi-Wan could see his student starting to get upset, and so he tried to steer back into the chorus, but Anakin stood up, walking around his bed, suggesting that if the will of the Force was so right, then why would his mother be taken from him? Obi-Wan asked if he learned something from that incident. Anakin threw out answers that he was weak, that he wasn't strong enough to save her, and that the Tusken Raiders deserved no better fate than to be slaughtered. Obi-Wan didn't know about the massacre, but he assumed Anakin was only speaking in hyperbole. He then asked Anakin if these were facts, or if it was his own perspective of the events that transpired on Tatooine. Perhaps the loss of his mother made him a stronger person at heart. Maybe it taught him to treasure his time with those he loved most. If loss was a choice, no one would ever choose it, but without it, we wouldn't ever evolve. Without it, we would never better ourselves, whether it be the loss of a loved one or losing at something in our interests. Anakin sighed. He turned over to his master and asked if there was some way to save people. Obi-Wan was understandably disheartened by this response. The words he spoke weren't retained, and apparently to Anakin, they were worth nothing. Anakin said that there had to be a way. If Plagueis could figure it out, then how couldn't they? Obi-Wan asked what he meant. Anakin turned back. He said it was nothing. Kenobi asked who Plagueis was, not recognizing the name but noticing its sinister ring. Only Sith had names like that, and Obi-Wan could tell that Anakin was reaching for something, so he asked what it was. Anakin told his master that last night, at the Opera House, Palpatine told him a Sith legend, one about the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. Ever since Maul showed himself, Obi-Wan did extensive research on the Sith. He learned about their most powerful members and taught himself how to be the perfect counter to 90% of them. Due to his mastery in Form 3, he'd be the perfect opponent to fighting most of their styles. He did this because he assumed that whoever instructed Maul would be a descendant from Bane, as Bane was a descendant from the other ancient Sith. Kenobi never heard the name Plagueis before was the main point of this, meaning he was a Sith from the long line of Sith before Maul, Tyrannus, and Sidious. Obi-Wan asked if he told Palpatine about his nightmares, and Anakin shook his head. Kenobi didn't want to jump to conclusions, but how come Anakin didn't sort this out in his mind? It was like Palpatine wanted to be caught. Obi-Wan didn't accuse Palpatine of anything yet, but he asked about the encounter, and asked where the conversation stemmed from. Anakin just said that Palpatine was prying about the Jedi and their feelings towards him. He then lied and said that he never told Palpatine a thing about the mission he was on. Obi-Wan rubbed his eyes and then looked over to the window, and asked Anakin why he didn't find this Sith legend concerning, and Skywalker kinda shrugged it off, not giving a clear answer, which helped Obi-Wan determine how desperate Anakin had become. Then a thought crossed Obi-Wan's mind, again. Presuming that Palpatine would be behind this, he floated a question, one asking Anakin if he believed if it were possible for the Sith to know about how his mother died. If so, would that Sith give him nightmares because he knew that's what Anakin feared the most? Anakin thought it was a sound idea, but who could that Sith be? He didn't tell many people about the nightmares before his mother died. It was, at most, Padme, Obi-Wan, and Palpatine. So logically, Padme was a Sith Lord. No, but what Obi-Wan did was make Anakin come to the conclusion that there was no one who was this close to him. He didn't know how easy or hard it was to put dreams into someone's head, but if Anakin could infer enough to figure out that it wasn't extremely difficult, then it had to be someone close to him. But if Palpatine was a Sith Lord, it meant Anakin couldn't even get the words out of his mouth. Obi-Wan stood up and moved around the room and put his hand on Anakin's shoulder and told him he wasn't alone. They could get through this, they just had to talk about this. While they were speaking, they missed a council session, and because Obi-Wan wasn't present, they dispatched Master Fisto to the Outer Rim. The reason the council knew about Utapau is because Obi-Wan informed Mace of Anakin's information. He expressed that they wouldn't be in the session. Simply put, Anakin told Obi-Wan during their conversation, Obi-Wan transmitted the data to Windu, and Kenobi kept their focus on the conversation at hand rather than going to the council chambers. With Fisto leading the assault on Utapau, the council would adjourn. Instead of Anakin's room, they were still speaking about it. Obi-Wan gave Anakin room to talk it out, because he understood that for Anakin, it was his way with processing things. Plus, there was so much more Anakin knew about his relationship with Palpatine than Obi Wan did. Anakin remembered every time Palpatine coddled him after the big bad Jedi Masters, rightly, told him no. Every time Palpatine pulled him from a dangerous battlefront, or every time he was a split second short of running into Grievous. All of it was a plan. If Palpatine was the Sith Lord, that also meant he ordered Dooku to have Padme killed multiple times. Obi-Wan watched all the dots connect in Anakin's mind as he spoke aloud. He was getting more and more upset about this. The last 3 years were used as a grooming ground, one where Palpatine could pull Anakin closer to the dark side, and while the Jedi failed enormously throughout these years, they were being pushed away from the quote-unquote voice of reason. Obi-Wan could tell Windu now, but he instead wanted Anakin to make that decision. It gave him a sense of control over the situation, which Obi-Wan knew Anakin needed. But Skywalker was too busy rambling over gibberish. There were no formed words, just misconstrued syllables and annoyed grunts. He didn't understand how he could be so blind. He didn't understand why he stood up for Palpatine and why he consistently gave him the benefit of the doubt. He felt like a fool for it, and then he came back to Obi-Wan and asked what they should do. Obi-Wan told Anakin that this was on him. He didn't want to take control. What did he feel was the best thing for them to do? Anakin said that they should arrest and or kill Palpatine. Kenobi asked if they would do that alone or with assistance. Anakin remembered that Mace needed to know the truth too. He told Obi-Wan that he would inform Mace Windu himself, and they went there. The two would approach Mace Windu, who was currently the only remaining member in the council chambers. He was sitting quietly, thinking. The war was close to its conclusion, and he pondered over the idea of moving away from the Republic, especially in a scenario that Palpatine wasn't who he thought he was. When Anakin and Obi-Wan walked in, they bowed, and Mace informed them that Fisto would be leading the Utapau campaign. Fisto would arrive before his troops to test Grievous in a battle of strength. As a warrior, Grievous wouldn't be able to resist the bait. Fisto's troops would arrive after him, and hopefully they'd be able to squash the Separatist resistance. Regardless, Anakin asked Mace, before going forward, if he had ever heard of Darth Plagueis the Wise. Mace thought for a moment, going over some names he was aware of. He spoke them aloud to himself, saying Kreia, Nihilus, Malgus, but no Plagueis. He kept trying to find a name that ended with an S, but he couldn't find a Sith with the title The Wise. He asked Anakin why he asked, and Skywalker told Mace that Palpatine referred to him as one capable of saving individuals from death. Windu looked at Obi-Wan before his eyes came back to Skywalker. Mace was ready to pounce. If this was a Sith Lord, then they needed to act. The Republic and the Jedi were close to ending the war, and someone who had as much power as Palpatine had could rip out the foundation of democracy and establish an autocracy. Anakin said that Palpatine remarked this Sith Lord as being killed in his sleep. Mace realized that Sidious was right in front of them all along. He killed Plagueis and was giving Anakin false promises. He stood up and told Anakin he did well in reporting this. The Jedi would investigate this immediately. Obi-Wan suggested they stop and wait until Palpatine was in his personal residence. Mace looked over and nodded his head. It wasn't a terrible idea. Plus, they could gather every council member present on Coruscant, which due to Obi-Wan being here, Mace knew included Skywalker. The Jedi would regather. Since Fisto was in hyperspace, they had time to conspire without worrying that they'd be taken out by the Sith. Palpatine wouldn't do that until he had his assurance that Grievous was dealt with. No need to start an empire with a droid general on the loose. Mace was able to send out information to other Jedi and give them a warning from the temple, one that was done quietly. It told every Jedi to remain steadfast. As for the Council, they learned the truth. Mace assembled an elite squad with Agan Kolar, Saesee Tiin, Obi-Wan, Shaak Ti, Coleman Cash, and Anakin. If they arrived and Palpatine was a Sith, they'd likely be challenged with the blade, so Sindralik was also informed about the development to keep the temple safe. Without Grievous being dead yet, they had more time to plan everything out more precisely, and he gave instructions for what would be fulfilled by the other council members. For example, Coleman and Anakin would cover the escape routes, while the other 5 Jedi went in and attacked. When the sun fell on Coruscant, the Jedi quickly gathered up and departed for Palpatine's personal residence on Coruscant. The cover of darkness granted them security. There was no reason for the Senate to know about this unless the Jedi wanted it to be known. They arrived shortly after Palpatine did, and they made their move across the facility. Mace led Obi-Wan, Shaak Ti, Agan, and Saesee into it, while Anakin and Coleman kept watch at the exits. The Sith Lord walked around his abode, feeding off the darkness surrounding him. His home was a lair of the dark arts, filled to the brim with rituals, statues, and artifacts, all of which drawing on the dark side. Palpatine felt the Jedi arrive. He knew they were here, but Anakin wouldn't tell them, would he? Palpatine could feel Skywalker's presence, so perhaps it wasn't as bad as he initially believed it to be. Palpatine was optimistic that this wouldn't result in a duel, but he grabbed 2 lightsabers just to be safe. He wandered through his estate in search for the Jedi, who walked through the main hall. Sidious stood above them, gliding his hand across the railing and asking what he could help them with in these late hours of the night, not even wondering why they were here. The Jedi looked up, and Windu spoke before them all, igniting his lightsaber and telling him that he was under arrest. A small back and forth followed, but Sidious had the advantage. 2 blades ignited, and he launched himself over the railing and slashed his blades towards the Jedi. They fought hastily to defend themselves from the assault. And even though they were seemingly prepared, they didn't act as such. Sidious sliced through them, blasting lightning through Agan Kolar before throwing Saci Tin into a wall. Kenobi moved forward with Shaak Ti and Mace Windu. Their blades were fierce and quick, but Sidious had a counter for each and every move. His 2 lightsabers collided against the Jedi, pushing them off of him. Shaak Ti was thrown into the banister before Obi Wan was kicked in the chest and back into a glass sculpture. Sidious swung his 2 blades at Mace, before spinning around him and slicing through Master Tin, who was on his back feet. Sidious then launched himself at Kenobi. Outside the mansion, Anakin told Master Kaj that they needed to go. They couldn't abandon them. Coleman was very adamant that they didn't need assistance. It was a 5 versus 1. Palpatine wouldn't be any trouble for them. Skywalker closed his eyes and clenched his fist. He could feel. Anakin bursted through the doors, and Coleman followed. Skywalker came in and threw both of his hands forward before Sidious could land a strike against Kenobi. Not a mortal one, but close enough. Skywalker's force push launched Sidious off of his feet and through the air. Anakin and Coleman ran forward, as Shaak Ti and Obi Wan gained their balance and stood with the other Jedi. Mace looked to Skywalker and Kaj without saying a word, but it was a nod of gratitude for not listening to orders. Sidious turned back and hissed. He told Skywalker to throw his Latin with them would be a waste of his potential. Anakin readied his blade, and the other Jedi did. Sidious threw himself across the room with such force it knocked 3 Jedi over. Sidious fended off strikes from Skywalker and Windu, who were quick to remain steadfast. Sidious slashed the ground, shooting sparks up before throwing the 2 Jedi back, and throwing his blade through Coleman's neck before cutting down Shaak Ti. Sidious saw his opportunity to remove 2 more opponents before defending himself from an aggressive strike made by Anakin. He told Skywalker to fuel his anger, let it take over his body and lead him to true power. Anakin realized that Sidious was doing this to take advantage of him, and he held back, just enough for Sidious to sweep his legs out from under him and prepare for a deadly blow. Before it could be landed, Kenobi blocked, and Mace threw his elbow into Sidious's jaw, before soloing him out and sweeping his blade under his lightsabers and striking across his abdomen. Sidious lay on the ground, looking up at the Jedi Master, holding on to what little life he had left. He was still so evil in his final form. Kenobi and Skywalker looked over and listened, after Obi-Wan helped Anakin off the ground. Mace stood defensively as Sidious told them that they would never find victory, they'd never bring balance to the Force, and Skywalker's loved ones would never survive. His only intention was to create as much chaos as possible. Even in his death, all he wanted to do was sow disorder. His head dropped back, and his final breath was laid. The Sith were defeated. The relics around the home, ones being attached to the Sith, let out an ear-piercing howl before being silenced with their shattering and their breaking. It was at this moment that the 3 Jedi realized they were inhibited by the darkness's grip. Sidious lured them into a trap, hoping that he could capitalize off of it. He didn't. Now 4 Council members were dead, because their powers were weakened in the dark aura of the mansion. Mace turned to Obi-Wan and told him to bring Anakin back to the temple, saying it was time, before telling them both that he would deal with all this. Anakin didn't know what this meant, but Mace Windu had suggested before ever assigning Anakin to the mission that if it was completed, whether Palpatine be a Sith or not, that Anakin should receive a promotion to the rank of Master. At the moment, Mace figured Obi-Wan would like to have the honors of bestowing the title upon his student. Despite the war with the Sith being won, the Clone Wars were not over. Fisto won his duel, but like his previous encounter with the droid general, Grievous escaped. The Separatist Council was captured, due to the clones arriving immediately. Now the hunt for Grievous would be nearly impossible. He had new resources, due to the Separatist Reserve, and the Jedi now had to explain why they failed to capture and destroy Grievous, as well as why they decided to assassinate a public figure like Palpatine. The whole situation was unfavorable, but like Windu said, he would handle it. However, one of his biggest allies wouldn't be able to support him or the Jedi in the Senate. In the days following Palpatine's death and Grievous's escape, Padme would give a healthy birth, one that Master Skywalker would be present for. But at the same time, Mace Windu and Obi-Wan were holding down the fort, so to say, in the Senate. They were defending their actions and explaining why they were made. Therefore, Windu was also able to make a bargaining within the Senate. Many of the senators close to Palpatine were in favor of Masameda's suggestion, which was activating the clone executive order to wipe out the Jedi. But luckily, Bail Organa stood up for the Jedi. He was one of the most liked senators in the Republic, and his words demanded the attention of his peers. Bail could get away with only so much, so he made a proposition to the Senate. He suggested that Masameda and the secretive executive orders be shared with the entire Senate, and that a new interim chancellor not connected to Palpatine be elected, one that could stand in the middle of both sides, and one that could bring the Republic and the galaxy to peace. However, to address the public's concerns with the Jedi, they would be given 1 full year to end the war. If they weren't capable of it, then they'd be removed from their positions within the Republic, and the full extent of the clone executive orders would be brought down onto them. They all believed the Jedi could get it done, but this was the best he could get for them, and they were very appreciative of it. Mace and Bail's deal would be set into motion, and he would return to the temple for the funeral of the dead masters, the ones who helped bring down the last Sith Lord. Ironically, Mace Windu, after days of dealing with senators and making sure the Republic didn't come after the Order, completely forgot about what Sidious said regarding Anakin's loved ones. He honestly couldn't care less at this point. Anakin proved himself trustworthy, and that at the end of everything was all Mace cared about. He finally had a reason to trust Skywalker. Anakin's last few days were met with confusion, gratitude for the promotion, and of course, fear. He used his new position to scour the archives because he was never needed for the council sessions that never happened. He simply looked and looked and looked, but he found no way to save a life. But he never needed to. He was thankful for Obi Wan's advice because without it, he would have missed the birth of Luke and Leia. No matter how much of a perfect outcome this was, Anakin had to go back to war. Ahsoka returned with Maul, and he was put into carbon freezing. She did not rejoin the Jedi Order, simply because they were involved in the war that was to follow. However, she did decide to accompany Anakin for the rest of the war, in hopes that she could be an aid in taking down General Grievous, who was still elusive in the Outer Rim. Due to finding the reserves that Dooku had kept hidden for the entirety of the war, Grievous decided a blitz strategy. The strategy was very hands-off for him because he bulked up his main fleet, making it the primary strength of his military. However, Grievous's blitz included a number of kamikaze missions, simply to damage Republic defensive fleets. Most of these missions were semi-successful, but due to the vast number of attacks and how widespread they were, there was no way to pinpoint Grievous's position. He also, because he didn't have Sidious or Dooku on his neck, was able to secure every Foundry planet and turn their factories to focus on the construction of commando droids. They were the key to winning this war for him. But Grievous was working against the clock here. The CIS government was half on board with surrendering, while the Separatist Council, that was captured at Utapau, was throwing out locations of Separatist factories to save themselves. Interim Chancellor Ung was leading a committee investigation of the Separatist Council, trying to figure out where they were lying and where they weren't. He kept giving them hollow plea deals because there was no way they'd get out of this without prison. The Separatist leaders had to accept these deals because there was no way they'd make it otherwise. On the battlefront, the Jedi were fighting with everything they had. They employed tactics to counter every Separatist attack. Luckily for them, the Jedi almost won the war before Palpatine died. They had already won major campaigns galaxy-wide. All they needed to do now was find Grievous. Commando squads were out and about looking for him, but they never found a sign. Council members were traveling with these commandos in hope that if they found Grievous, they could kill him. The era of the war was no longer large-scale battles, more so skirmishes to the finish line. The large-scale battles still happened, but only when Grievous's fleet showed itself. All these encounters with Grievous were total victories for him. With the war resurfacing and starting over again, Anakin and Ahsoka got the best part of being paired up again. They missed each other dearly, and even though Anakin wasn't training her, it was a joy to have his sister around again. There would still be skirmishes with droid forces, and losing troopers was never easy for Ahsoka, but they were getting closer and closer to victory, which for them was better to finish the way it started. About 3 months into the deal made with the Jedi in the Senate, Skywalker's fleet was engaged. With the 501st and 332nd present, Anakin would make a daring move to bring Grievous into a brawl. His hope was that he could force Grievous to stay. He split his fleet evenly and allowed Grievous to use a pincer maneuver. Yularen was not pleased with this at all, but he could cool his jets for a hot minute. Anakin wanted to get into that capital ship. He was willing to sacrifice resources to make it happen too. Grievous bit the bait. Anakin's fleet was the largest he'd come across since he started his scourge of the Republic forces. Skywalker filled the LA-ATs and gave all the troopers one specific order: destroy every single escape craft. They were going to trap Grievous on that ship. Yularen and the fleet's orders were to cripple it. Anakin also told the troopers that once they were dropped off, the LAATs were to leave until they won the battle, so this was a volunteer mission only. Luckily, many of these men were ready to end the war on their terms. Ahsoka and Rex then joined Anakin in the plot armor LAAT, which was invincible, and they departed. The fleet battle was nasty, but Yularen deployed 3 Arquentans to cover the LAAT assault. The gunships flew right under their bellies as they soaked up damage from the capital ships. Once they got into range, the LAATs deployed into the hangar bays of the capital ship. The clones exited quickly, before the gunships dropped out and joined the Arquentans in their retreat. As the space battle unfolded around them, Skywalker and Tano split up. They knew the other could handle a fight with Grievous, if it came to it. They just needed to last for as long as they could until the other one got there. Thanks to the elite work of the 501st and 332nd, the clones were able to quickly disable every single ship in the vessel, while also wiping out battle droids that pursued them. When Grievous finally learned of the attack on his vessel, it was a bit too late. He started to make a retreat from the bridge. The space battle was going poorly, so he needed to run, so that he could pull together the remaining forces he had around the galaxy and turn them on the Republic, before escaping in the exile so he could survive. But as he left the bridge, he was confronted by Skywalker, who was surrounded by clones. Anakin's blade ignited and Grievous looked on in disgust. At long last, finally, the 2 best generals of the war could square off. The fight for victory or death. Grievous ignited 2 blades and lunged across the room. Anakin blocked as quickly as he could, and then he told the men to take control over the bridge. Rex and the boys funneled around Grievous while informing Ahsoka of their location. Anakin spoke with Fisto and Kenobi about their respective encounters with the droid general. He was ready for this. Anakin parried everything that came his way, but even his speed was no defense for Grievous. The droid general came prepared with every move he acquired from over the war. Anakin then switched to Form 1, making him much less aggressive, but his swing started to confuse Grievous's algorithm. The blades crossed each other, and Anakin stepped back, spacing away from the droid general. Ahsoka then ran up from the other side and her blades ignited. Grievous got angry and launched himself at her, but as he did, he was held in place. Anakin used all of his strength to crush General Grievous' circuits, before Ahsoka drove her blade forward, finishing the job. They did it. The war was over. The Jedi could go back to standing side by side with the Republic, and they could go home, finally. Anakin thanked Ahsoka for joining him, and she told him that she couldn't have been happier to finish the war by his side. Anakin thought about going home, to see his best friend Obi Wan, and his wife, and his daughter, and his son. His son. A beeping could be heard, and Anakin turned over to look for Rex, but the hallways were empty. His eyes moved from side to side, as all the freedom he just felt dissipated. Anakin looked over his left, and then his right, before feeling his lungs compress around him. Before he could begin to realize what it was, he heard a voice come over from in front of him. His eyes opened, and he looked at his reflection. The voice informed Lord Vader that his shuttle was ready for departure. They had just arrived outside the 2nd Death Star. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all of our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Jango Fett Clone, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Gallivan Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir Willem 1767, Darth Revan, Grandy Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo Weewu 67, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tam, Johnny DeGuin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Machine Gamer, Lord Callie, Youngly Slayer 66, Madman Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, Fortis Legacy Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, the main 3 first names, Darkseid 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Special thanks to N-Sabers for sponsoring our 125,000 subscriber lightsaber giveaway. If you want to find out how you can win one of 6 lightsabers, check the pinned comment down below. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. So, that's a little bit of a twist. I'm not gonna lie, I've had that just sitting in my mind for forever, and I was waiting for the proper video to use it in, and I felt like this story was the most deserving of it. I wanted it to feel like him trying to reconnect back with himself, but it's not like he's trying to do it consciously. It's like he's dreaming or meditating. It's like a subconscious thing within him, and kind of like a cool little headcanon, if you will, before Return of the Jedi really begins. But the what if itself was more so to focus on Obi-Wan and Anakin's relationship as basically brothers, or father and son, as Anakin would see Obi-Wan as a father, as he referred to him in Attack of the Clones. But anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you liked that little twist. I do want to try and do more twist stuff like that. But let me know what you think down below. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.